G'day ladies and gents, and welcome back to War Thunder with Mags, and welcome back to War Thunder Ground Forces. In anticipation of the upcoming release of British tanks, I decided it was time for me to bring the Churchill as well as the Sherman Firefly back out for another spin, because there's been at least one significant change to the Churchill. When the Churchill Black Price was first released at the start of patch 1.53, it was a battle rating 6.0 tank. And it almost was exclusively up-tiered. It was almost always the lowest tier tank in its battle rating. Since then, Gaijin have down-tiered it to 5.7. Now that's only a 0.3 battle rating change. However, what it's done to this tank's matchmaking is huge. This tank is now almost exclusively the top tier tank on its team. I can count on one hand the number of times that I've actually faced a tank above battle rating 5.7 since this change went into effect. And what this has done is changed this tank from something that I felt was a giant XP pinata for the enemy team into possibly one of the most dangerous tanks you can run into on the battlefield. Now it is still easy enough to kill at these battle ratings, and you're going to see a couple of examples of ways that the Churchill is very, very vulnerable to attack in this battle. But first, what am I up to here? Well, the Churchill is slow. It is incredibly slow. It makes the mouse look fast. At this point I've rolled out of the cap circle, I've gone around the south side of the town, and I'm doing a little bit of hill sniping. Now there's an M18 that is off to my right that is trying to manoeuvre around and get into a flanking position on the 4 German tanks that are on the other side of this ridge. What I'm trying to do here is lay down a little bit of covering fire for him and try and put some shots into some of these tanks while he's getting into position to ambush. Now you'll notice I'm changing back and forth between the binoculars and the gun sights themselves. The reason for this is the binoculars are actually, well, they have a higher zoom, which is the first obvious thing, but the second point is they are actually positioned at the point of the commander's hatch, so they are higher than the gun sight, which is allowing me to look over the ridge and see the tanks clearly before flicking back to the gun sight to try and pick out a point where I can actually put shells into the target. Now I was receiving a little bit of return fire here. I was not concerned. At this range, keeping the Black Price facing frontally towards the enemy on about a 20-degree angle, they can't pen me. There's no shell that the tanks that I'm facing have that can penetrate the front of this tank in this situation. And it looks like the M18 has made its move. It's starting to take out the tanks on the other side of the ridge, so at this point it's time for me to move on. Now I want to move back in towards the city. There is a push going on in there. I can see the flashing on the map at the moment. And I didn't have to move too far to find my next tank to shoot at. Su-152s, extremely dangerous but extremely vulnerable to penetrating shots to the right hand side as the shells go straight into their ammo rack. So continuing to press into the town, now it looks like they've got tanks arrayed around this block just ahead. I would say there's a couple of Russian tanks hidden in there. There's no markers on the map at this point, but nobody seems to be advancing through particularly fast. So I'm going to roll down here, staying in the open quite deliberately. The Churchill is not particularly manoeuvrable. In a tight city environment, it is extremely vulnerable. It is better to keep it out in the open where you can see where the shots are coming from an angle against them rather than trying to fight in confined city environments. First shot into the T-34, that shuts it down for the moment. Bounce a shot from a second T-34, line it up, put one straight through its side. Now I've received an artillery fire notification here. There's not a lot I can do about that at the moment while I'm engaging these tanks. KV-1 straight ahead, shot straight through it. Turn the turret back, looking for that second T-34. It's sitting out in the open trying to line up a shot on me. Put one through, that's him down. Now we go back for the first T-34. It looks like it's gotten its gun back up. Line it up, put one through it, take it out. Begin rolling forward to try and clear the area, but unfortunately I didn't clear it quite fast enough. Now I could have started moving forward earlier to try and get out of the artillery strike that I knew was coming, but rolling forward would have opened up my side to the T-34 that I shot in the first place. I wasn't sure if its gun was up or running or not. And the Black Price is incredibly vulnerable to shots to the side. It could easily have been one-shot by that T-34, so I needed to secure it before I could advance. Unfortunately, I didn't take out the tanks fast enough. But no matter, with all those kills and all those hits, I managed to secure enough points. Time to bring out the Fairy Firefly. Now, this is a plane that I was really looking forward to bringing out in War Thunder ground battles. Mainly because it's not all that great in realistic. It's actually so poor and realistic that this plane is almost completely stock. So what better way to upgrade it than by doing a little bit of close air support. Smooth release, 2 tanks, and I just revenged myself on the guy who managed to take me out with the artillery strike. So with bombs released, time to return back to base and get some more. So, taking off on the runway on this Ground Forces map with two 1,000 pound bombs strapped underneath the plane, in almost stock format, meaning I've got no performance upgrades whatsoever. I actually found I needed to use a little bit of flap, just deploying the takeoff flaps right at the end of the runway, just to give me enough lift to get this thing up in the air, retract the landing gear and then retract the flaps, and she was pretty smooth to get up. Now, I never did run off the end of the runway, but I just feel that if I wasn't using those takeoff flaps to get up and was running the grass, you ran the risk of running off the dip at the end of the runway and potentially destroying your aircraft. So I think it was just something to keep in mind. So returning into the combat zone, and this time things are a little bit more interesting. The enemy team definitely has a couple of fighters up. Now, for those of you who haven't spent much time flying aircraft in War Thunder realistic ground forces, there are no markers. It's sort of like half sim. There are no markers on enemy aircraft, but you get markers on yours, so you can locate where people are. But first things first, primary role, close air support. There's a tank holding position in amongst the buildings. It's delaying our forces' advance, and now it's not delaying our forces' advance. Turn out hard, we've got a little bit of AAA support coming up at the moment from the enemy team. Now you're going to notice a couple of graphical issues on the horizon there at the moment. I have no idea what's causing that. This popped up on my client as of the last patch. I'm hoping it'll be gone soon, because it's really distracting. Spot an unmarked enemy aircraft moving through. It looks like a P-47, much faster than I am, but there are no markers in War Thunder Realistic. At least not for ground forces, so can he see me coming? We most certainly should be able to now after putting those shots through. As you can see, these are stock guns with stock British default belts. I decided to follow for a little bit and unload some rounds in his direction. I'm only going to RTB for more bombs anyway, and was rewarded with a critical hit, set him on fire. Now, I don't believe that actually kills him, but it's definitely going to make sure that he's going back to base and not bothering my ground forces for a little bit. So, time to get my plane home. But, while I'm flying over the town, always nice to do a little bit more close air support. I've got no bombs this time, but we do have a tank that's trying to progress around the corner and one enemy tank exposed in the middle. So, 20mm rounds all over the ground, smoke and haze, make it difficult for him to aim so my tanks can move, and then vacate out through the city. One other thing you'll notice if you're watching my FPS in the bottom left hand corner, since the same patch that started messing with my graphical effects, I've started getting random frame rate drops. I normally record stable at around 140 FPS with no problems at all on maximum settings. I've been getting frame rate drops to below 30 fairly regularly since that last update. So once again, RTB'd and returning back to battle. Now we're running into a little bit of a problem here. At this point, our team has been mostly eliminated. Almost all of the vehicles remaining on our team are AAA, while the enemy still seem to have a few medium tanks floating around. Now, it's at this point that I want to change back into a tank. However, I do have a Firefly here that is loaded with bombs. So what I'm going to do is release on a target first, see if I can clear a little bit of the airspace, because I can already see a dot ahead that's attacking ground targets, and then switch back to a tank. Now, my preference here would be to release the bombs first. However, the dot appears to be moving through on our B-25, so I've got to get rid of him first. Closing distance on the enemy aircraft now, it's an IL-2. Now, these are default British belts with stock guns, so they spray like shotguns. However, the IL-2 tries to climb for altitude and makes an easy target of himself, denying the enemy team close air support. Bring it back around, I'm now looking for targets. Normally I would fly wide and then re-swoop across the city, but I'm limited time here. I need to get a tank back on the ground. We're holding B and we're sitting in the midline, but we know the enemy team has tanks. Our tanks are all bunched up as a result. So I get eyes on a target, release way too flat and way too late. This was just a really bad attack angle. The bombs go nowhere near the target. Waste of two perfectly good 1,000-pounders. And unfortunately, we just lost our B-25 as well. Now, the B-25 was taken out by that Russian P-47 that I set on fire earlier. I don't have eyes on the target at the moment. I was tempted to hang around and see whether or not I could find it and bait it into a low-altitude turn fight where I could kill it. But instead I decided to do one little pass over the town, had to get a look of the lay of the land and where the enemy targets were, the enemy tanks specifically, fire a few shots off to distract them, and then get back to base. Now, I was originally going to fully RTB and land, but the problem with that is you're not reimbursed points if you land an intact repaired aircraft and then leave it. You're allowed to redeploy the aircraft, of course, but it will still cost more points as if you had already lost a vehicle. So instead of doing that, I decided to just J out. So just scouting out the area, putting a few shots in over the A point. exit out over the city, and J out of the aircraft so I can get into a tank faster. So a couple of minutes of advancing later and I'm once again pushing through the city in the Black Prince. Now, the Black Prince gets 3 deployments because at the moment there is no British tree, there's only 4 premiums. So you get multiple spawns on each vehicle until the British main tree has been put in, at which time those multiple spawns will go away. Taking advantage of it at the moment, I've got plenty of points, and I'm heading through the centre of the city as I know that's where the enemy team is going to be, and I want them to see me, I want them to focus on me. The rest of my team has fallen back to the A point, they're all in AAA trucks. I need them to shoot at my armour. So first shot in, and what we've got ahead is a KV-85 that's about to have a very, very bad day. However, remember what I said before about the Black Prince being very vulnerable inside of a city? KV-2 camped between buildings on the south side of the city, just waiting for somebody to advance up between the buildings. Easy kill. In hindsight, I should never have deployed the Churchill. I should have gone straight to this thing, the Sherman Firefly. Now, if you remember back to my first review video, I didn't particularly like this tank. It was incredibly soft, it was incredibly easy to kill, it could be killed and penetrated by anything it could potentially face. It was a very vulnerable tank and it didn't have the mobility to make up for it, and I didn't feel that its gun was great enough to really make up for its deficits in speed, mobility and armour. However, I have found a niche for it now. I found a place where it does exceptionally well, and that's as a support tank to the Churchill. At the start of a ground forces match, the Churchill is an ideal tank. With massive amounts of armour, it can take the shots of the big guns that the enemy team is going to deploy at you in return. But as the battle wanes on, those big tanks slowly disappear, and what you start looking for is a tank that is more mobile. The enemy tanks near the end of the battle will tend to be faster than the Churchill, so if you need to chase something down, the Churchill is not ideal. The Firefly, on the other hand, while it's not the most mobile tank in the world, is more than mobile enough for the end, and that gun is incredibly powerful when you take away all of the enemy's big armour tanks. The Sherman Firefly is almost an ideal tank for the follow-on tank in a battle where you lead with the Churchill, and it works every single time. It's great. In fact, that was the last shot of the battle. The only enemy player that's remaining in a vehicle is the P-47 that shot down the B-25 before, and he's going to J out of the battle soon enough because he has no tanks to deploy. So that's it. We cap this point out, and then we win. So let's go through the results. So results for the battle. Second place for the team with 9 tank kills, 9. 115,700 Silver Lions, and we came in with 7,169 vehicle research points. And that was enough for me to finally unlock the GRC Mark 8 pylons for the Fairy Firefly. The other 2 vehicles, of course, being premium vehicles, had nothing to unlock. And as you can see, my Firefly FR Mark 5 is very, very stock. So, what do I think of British tanks now? Well, I'm much happier with the Firefly now I've found its niche. I still don't think it's a great lead tank. I'm yet to have a truly exceptional battle in it, taking it in as my primary tank, but as a support for the Churchill, it is fantastic. The Churchill itself, or the Black Prince itself, at 5.7, it's still killable, as you can see, and it's quite easily killable if you know how to take it out, but it is definitely a more powerful tank. The ammunition that it's got available makes it incredibly dangerous, especially with its fire rate. And the Fairy Firefly. This is a plane that I really didn't enjoy as a ground attacker inside of Realistic. It's just not a great plane, neither one of them. However, in ground forces battles, it is incredibly good, even when it's almost completely stock. I think the Fairy Firefly is going to be one of my mainstay aircraft for high-level British tank battles from now on, and I think that's where I'm mostly going to use it. Anyways, ladies and gents, I hope you enjoyed the video. Click like if you do, subscribe if you want to see more. Fly smart, fly safe, and I'll catch you in the skies.